My name's Frank Rankin. I know it says that on the little screen thing, but still think it's nice to say your name. I've been doing information governance for 30 odd years, mostly in the public sector. Long stint in the NHS, spent time in the higher education, local government, central government, short stints in oil and whiskey, but mostly public sector. And Jason, you want to say hi?
Yes, hi everybody. So I'm Jason King. I'm currently the records manager at the Crown Estate, but I did have, before that, I spent 20 odd years in government department managing records. So yeah, public body. Crown Estate's a public body as well. So and I like a really good natter about stuff, and I'd like to think that I'm probably quite a realist. And I'm sure this will come out in the chat, but there's theory, all this stuff is good, but we have to deal with the human element, which always throws a spanner in the works. So that's what I'm looking forward to, just having a good chat about what's going on and what you think and what Frank thinks, and get some common ground and perhaps some hits and tips. So there we go.
Stuff. And hopefully you're also voting in the poll. I will see those results in a moment, and that'll help inform the discussion. And it is a discussion, so it's not the kind of webinar where we've come with a set of predefined answers. We're going to kick this around. I've got some ideas about the things we can use to help make the case for information governance. Jason does, but I'm sure you guys do as well. So I'll be interested to hear your ideas and thoughts on how we convince our colleagues, convince our organisations that what we are doing has value, which of course I'm also, I'm slightly making an assumption already by saying that it does, but I'll come back and challenge that point as well. So how are we doing for poll returns, Sharon?
We've got about 50 at the moment. So unless anybody wants to do any else, I can lock that. Yeah, everybody.
Thank you. Good stuff. So yeah. So hopefully you can see, if you click on the Slido tab, you should be able to see the results so far. And that's quite heartening in itself. Go back to your realism, Jason, only 9% saying that it's excellent the way information governance is managed in the organisation. And then again, only 4% saying it's actually poor. So yeah, it looks like we're seeing not a bad degree of management support and leadership. But of course, that's always coming under pressure. And that initial question, what is the point of information governance, is something we have to keep coming back to and revisiting. Because it depends. I know those of you who've seen me for training before, I say it depends quite a lot, but it does depend. It depends on our organisation and our sector. It depends on who we're talking to, who's our audience when we're making the argument that information governance is important. And it also depends on the information we've got available. It's a cliche, knowledge is power, but the more information we've got about the impact of the information governance programme in our organisation, the better placed we are to make the case. And I'll come back and expand on on those as we go along. Don't know, would you add in anything else there, Jason? Is that the sort of main big factors?
I think you're exactly right. I mean, clearly there are some institutions where I think every institution has information governance, or because of what's it part of, what makes it up. But I think there's definitely some organisations where it's just huge on the agenda, and I'm quite sort of relieved to see a lot of the poll results as well, because you just sort of get this impression it's a little bit like the Wild West all over the place. But it's quite heartening to see that some people think they've got a reasonable good grip on it.
Thanks, Jason. And I think there's also several headings I would look at this under. So, I mean, Joanne is raising the question, how are we defining information governance, which is a really good point to raise. And yeah, I've spent quite a few sessions with undergraduates, with postgraduates, I should say, at University of Glasgow, trying to pin this down, and it's very difficult to pin down. Here's my glib answer. I would say that if I'm working in an organisation, information governance is pretty much whatever I say it is as part of my programme, because it will vary. So some organisations, it will be very much data protection focused and the other things around that. Others might add to that records management or freedom of information. And those are the kind of core staple ones, I suppose, certainly in the public sector. I like John coming in there, flagging the security word as well. So some organisations, we might be including information security. We may also be including data governance. It's a fairly elastic label, information governance. Yeah, we should do an entire webinar on that, actually, Sharon. That's the other one. That's another one to come. We've jumped to what's the point?
Yeah, I think it's I mean, I did I looked it up a bit, because I, like you, Frank, I was thinking, I could say it's this and I could say it's that. So I clicked on something, and I've got this huge list that someone came up with. I'm just going to quickly go through it, because it was quite a bit of an eye-opener for me. So someone said it incorporates information security, compliance, data quality, data governance, electronic discovery, risk management, privacy, data storage and archiving, knowledge management, business operations and management, audit, analytics, IT management, master data management, enterprise architecture, business intelligence, big data, data science and finance. And it sort of dawns on me, or helped me realize a bit more, that yes, it is very difficult. I mean, it's such a it's sort of such a wide ranging thing that sort of gets its fingers in all these sorts of pies, which probably makes it one of the biggest challenges, really, because it's just all encompassing.
Yeah.
And then and quite hard to, in a sense, I think, quite hard to manage, and quite hard to pin down who's in charge of managing it, which I think is probably the biggest challenge.
Thanks, Jason. Yeah, I know we've probably made a couple of colleagues feel a little bit queasy with that list.
Yes,
as Michael says, imagine that lot as a job description.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. We need to be clear what's realistic within our organisation. What have we got a political mandate for? There are things on Jason's list where, if we started looking at them, there may be colossal turf wars. So things like data governance, for example, which are it's a bigger and bigger issue on the agenda. But there may already be people in your organisation specifically tasked with that, or there may be colleagues perhaps on the digital and IT side who see it as their domain. And if we start looking at it, you could be into real sharks and jets turf war territory. So I know that doesn't really answer your question, Joanna, because I don't think we can pin it down today. But you're right, it's important. You need to pin it down for each of your organisations. So like your definition there, Joanna, it's all the information related teams in your organisation, information management. We just need to join the dots. Good stuff. And yeah, this may well mean going way beyond what's directly your responsibility and building a sort of community of interest in the organisation to look at information governance and look at measuring the impact. So can I open it up a little bit? We've asked that point. Thanks, Joanna. We've started from that perspective. What's the point of information governance? How would you, colleagues, answer that question? So if you're challenged by senior management or by peers in the organisation about what's the point, why does your team need staff and a budget? What are you actually delivering? What would you say? So if you like to pop some things in the chat, or if anyone's willing to come off the mic and have a say, that's great as well. But if you pop some ideas in the chat, and I'll be interested to see the themes that come out of that, if that's okay. Because one of the things I'm seeing, as you know, I've been doing this a little while, is my arguments change. And partly that's because my youthful enthusiasm is waning a bit, but it's also because the environment changes. So there are areas that I would make the case now which wouldn't have occurred to me years ago, or I would change the emphasis. So broadly speaking, and we'll unpack these, I would say there's kind of 5 broad headings where I would make arguments for what's the point of information governance. Compliance is the biggie, probably, and it's the first one that probably springs into our mind. Thanks, John. It's absolutely, it's not really the driver anymore. So absolutely, I think that the emphasis on compliance, we have to shift a little bit. Related to compliance, there's risk. And we'll dig into that a bit more. There's also cost and value. So cost reduction, but also getting cost benefits, which historically I've kind of shied away from because it's actually hard work. It's really hard work to properly capture and quantify cost benefit. But cliche alert, current financial climate, I think we're going to have to do more, and I think there are opportunities as well in the way technology is shifting. And the fifth one, which I haven't properly bottomed out yet, I'd be really interested to hear if any of you or have done work on it, is around environmental impact. So information governance and reducing carbon footprint. I'll come back to that in a moment. Don't know if you want to, if anything you want to add to that, Jason. Would you agree with those headings?
Yeah, I mean, I think you've definitely hit that 2 that ring true with me, and one of them is the environmental, because I think it's definitely something now where, I mean, obviously it's sort of, that's a massive growing beast with lots of interest, and I think lots of organisations now are not just wanting to, but really having to turn around and just see that sort of impact that they're having. And I think the other thing that you said is just, it was that sort of change in technology. I mean, for example, the whole world of Microsoft 365 blows open some of the stuff that I was thinking about 5-10 years ago. I mean, I would have, like you, I'd have had a completely different answer then. But now I just see not necessarily the amount of stuff, but the volume of stuff, and really good examples of this. I mean, recently in the news, I mean, Twitter, WhatsApp, used by the government, all of this stuff that we never really thought about before. And years ago, I mean, like, depends how far you want to go back, but obviously it was paper, and then it became paper, and then computers came in, and now we're just WhatsApping and tweeting and TikToking, and it was herding cats before, and now it's just even, it's herding sheep, because there's even more sheep, and it's the sort of thing that sometimes keeps me up at night, just to think, oh, how are we going to sort of manage it? But yeah, I think sort of summarising that, sort of the modern world and the speed of change, it does make me wonder about what's going to happen in the future. It just makes it an even bigger beast than it was before.
Good stuff. Thanks, Jason. And then interesting as well to see a couple of points in the chat picking up on that environmental issue. So John, with your organisation, saying you've got a Scan It for the Planet page. Rhyming always helps. And Alison pointing out that the digital sustainability is becoming a hot topic, and you're part of NHS Scotland. And Adam saying, yeah, you flag the green issues, but stakeholders don't necessarily get it. And that it took me a while to get it, to be honest. It was only a few years ago that the penny finally really dropped with me, that actually there's a big bit of what we do ties into the green agenda. And I've just borrowed just one online headline there around dark data. So partly this is about getting organisations to reduce paper, but it's also to reduce the digital content, reduce what we create in the first place, and be more mindful of what we capture and create. That can even be down to email footprints. Our organisations, and we do it in LTD as well, get lots of nice shiny images at the bottom, the footer of our emails. But that increases file size and increases the carbon footprint of our email traffic. this particular example I've got online at the moment is pointing out that dark data, and their definition of it is, well, it's the use one stuff that then just swirls around on servers or on the cloud, adds colossally to the carbon footprint of organizations. So good that a couple of you are already looking at that. If that's not part of your argument at the moment, if that's not part of your why we do information governance, it's possibly worth exploring, talking to whoever leads in the green policies in your organisation, but also digital colleagues. It's interesting, John, so the US National Archives are saying there'll be a point in the future when they no longer accept paper records. So as I say, it's certainly early days for me in terms of quantifying that and beginning to look into how we make the environmental argument, but I think it's an important part of it. So I mentioned compliance at the top of the list, and it was interesting to see a couple of you coming in saying, well, okay, but yeah, it's not the top, it's not the main one necessarily for all your organisations. And I think that's interesting in itself. And I think it's worth being, for those of you who are already absolutely leading in compliance, that's fair enough, but it's about whether that chimes with your organisation and the people you're talking to. Because I think we've got a little bit of a good guy culture in information governance. And what I mean by that is we kind of assume that everybody thinks what we're doing is a good thing. And we kind of assume that everybody wants to be compliant and sees a value in it. One of my eureka moments in my younger days was early days of freedom of information. I was working in a central government department, and I don't know if any of you have worked in FOI in Whitehall, but from the very early days of freedom of information, the Cabinet Office was compiling stats. So essentially, there was a kind of monthly league table of Whitehall departments. And after a slightly shaky start, after a few months it settled down, my department was doing really well in terms of this FOI league table. We were quite proud of this. Me and my team were working hard, coming in on Sundays to clear FOI backlogs and things like that. But the result was we were consistently top of the list in terms of timeliness of FOI responses, in terms of the volume of requests we were disclosing in full, in terms of having the fewest number of refused requests. We thought this was pretty good. This was really good compliance. And I was called into a meeting with one of the senior managers who I won't mention the role they played because this is getting recorded and you'd be able to, maybe work back to who it was. And I was thinking, well, here we go, a wee bit of recognition for the team. But this very senior manager was looking at the league tables and said, any chance we could drop down to kind of mid-rankings? Any chance we could be late on a few more FOI requests? And that was one of those moments when I realised, okay, my focus in compliance with law maybe isn't necessarily shared by everyone. Rather than compliance, the target was, mediocrity. Let's hide in the pack. Let's not be out ahead of the rest. So that was one of those moments when I thought, okay, I really need to change my argument. And I don't know if anyone else has got something similar, but that assumption that everybody is full square behind compliance, I think we have to test that if we haven't already. Don't know if anyone's had similar experiences, or Jason, am I being too cynical there?
No, because I've had the same thing happen to me, and I think whereas we can all bang that IG compliance drum, that's very difficult to do. But I think a lot of organisations would say, okay, well, to do that, you're going to need this amount of resource then. And you go, yes, could I have a team of 20? And everyone's going to go, well, we're not going to give you 20 people for that. So why give you 20 people and be, top of the league tables when we could give you 10 people or 5 people and you be not bottom of the league tables? So I think you're absolutely right. I've definitely experienced that before, and especially where it does tend to be a resource issue. And again, I'm going to be very cynical now. Sometimes as a sort of a back office operation, it's deemed to be, as long as we're doing okay, fine, because there are other parts of the organisation and the business where the money stroke resources could be, and it's an awful phrase, but better spent. So yeah, definitely. I was funny enough. As soon as you were telling your tale there, I was thinking, yeah, that's happened to me as well. So,
which isn't to say compliance shouldn't absolutely be part of the argument, but it can't be the only one. We also need to be realistic in terms of the compliance, or maybe more realistically, or more accurately, the enforcement risk, because of it's one of those classic drivers of information governance is compliance with UK GDPR and Data Protection Act 2018, because as everyone knows, the ICO's get these big, scary fining powers. But how realistic is that as an argument? Because as I'm sure you all every day spend hours poring over the enforcement tracker. What's that? You've got lives? Okay, sad people like me look at sites like the enforcement tracker. And if one of our arguments is that information governance is important because we don't want to get on the wrong side of the ICO, and that's absolutely true. And if we look at ICO guidance materials and things like the accountability framework, for example, it's very useful in that it doesn't just emphasise the sort of the what we think of as the pure GDPR elements. It does flag wider aspects of information governance, like records management, for example, like information asset management. And certainly if you're ever audited, either voluntarily or by choice by the ICO, they do look at information governance in quite a broad way. But when you look at their enforcement action, they tend to take quite a narrow slice. So if I click on the union flag here, you'll see that the enforcement action focuses mostly on information security. So for most of the time, it's Article 51F and Article 32. So that's the information security ones. That's the definite bias of the enforcement activity, certainly the fining activity of the Information Commissioner. Whereas if we look at, well, let's go with Spain, for example. So yeah, absolutely a few security ones, but lots of other aspects as well, subject access rights and other rights, over retention of data, failure to comply with the other principles, not just the security principle. So not to tell the ICO their job, but if we did see more visible enforcement activity on a wider range of data protection issues, and not so focused on personal data breaches and the security issues associated with them, then we might have a stronger argument to make there. Not that I'm wishing the ICO would come and fine us all, but just in terms of tempering how far we get with the compliance argument.
So I mean, I think that's really interesting, because I think that years ago, I think we did all try and bang a bit more of the compliance drum, and we would use the fines, obviously the ICO fines. We would use reputational risk, and definitely I've used that before with like the Public Records Act compliance. But I think then sort of the bigger bosses have started asking these questions, which is, well, what is that risk, and how big is that risk? And how I've sometimes been asked, well, who actually got fined for breaching the Public Records Act? That sort of thing. And you go, well, okay. And then, what are the fines like for this? And not that people don't want to be compliant, but again, it's a risk and it's a balancing approach, isn't it? And I think some organisations have definitely turned around and said, well, and just goes back to the sort of, how well do we want to be compliant? Yeah. Because it is that risk approach, isn't it? There's as long as we're not leaving data sticks in the middle of, cars in the middle of in a taxi or something that's got everybody's personal big stuff. That's probably what you might call big news headliner stuff that could damage an organisation. I mean, then most people, I think, at most organisations are just more wanting to look for what's in it for them. And I think that's definitely the avenue that I've tried to turn around. This goes full back to the, let's not focus on compliance. I definitely have been in organisations where I've gone, well, okay, that's a bit of a risk here, but you won't be able to do your job if we don't manage your information and govern it correctly. Yeah. And then suddenly people wake up a bit more and they're a bit more interested because it's more of a personal thing.
Stuff. Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Jason. And I'm looking at a couple of points in the chat, and Alison flagging that one of the questions you often get is, where's the evidence for your risk likelihood score? Yeah, risk analysis is one of the, it's quite often a kind of finger in the air thing, isn't it? And I think there's another topic for a workshop, for a webinar, Sharon. Yeah, we could be a lot more robust in drawing on actual evidence of breaches or audits, or things where we've actually got evidence of non-compliance or things are arising. Also interested to see some of the language. So both Michael and Mark in their chat have talked about compliance being seen sometimes as you both use the terms of boxes being ticked, and I think that is a real risk. I quite like the ICO accountability framework and tracker, but yeah, it certainly got boxes. Again, back to the point I made earlier about depends on your sector. We've looked to the ICO here because that's a regulator we've all got in common. But of course, depending on your sector, the ICO may be far from your scariest regulator, and it may be much more pertinent, say, in terms of compliance. It might be more relevant to, or at least more engaging with your management to look at what the Financial Conduct Authority says, or the housing regulator, or the ombudsman, or insert name of regulator here. So really a good point there from so Mark there saying that it's much better if you can highlight the business benefits of doing it well. And I think that's an area that I'm including myself in this, we need to get better at. Because historically, I've kind of slightly shied clear of going in too hard on cost savings and cost benefits, because as I mentioned briefly earlier on, they're actually quite difficult to evidence. And the danger is you assert that we do this, we will save that, and then people come back and say, where's your evidence for that? And if you haven't captured the evidence. But this is an area where I think we could have much stronger arguments for information governance if we were better at capturing the instances, getting baseline data. So what I mean by that, for example, is just that very simple process of, simple but time consuming, of measuring. How long does it take this team to locate this type of information in their current systems and structure? Okay, we revisit that. We work with them on business classification, we improve metadata, we improve systems, you dispose of life expired things. Let's measure again. How long does it now take? And that sounds very simple, but it's seldom we actually have that level of evidence, partly because who the heck's got the time to do it? Partly also because that's a skill set in itself, and maybe we do need to partner with colleagues in business analysis and things like that. But I think that's an area as a sort of community we need to get better at. And I think there are also specific opportunities coming up here because of the change in technical environment. So our organisations, I think, kind of a quick show of hands, is your organisation using Microsoft 365 or Office 365 to some extent? You pop your hands up, please, your virtual hands if you are. If you're using Microsoft 365, Outlook, SharePoint, OneDrive. See, I've only got about 5 or 6 people, so that's a bit more like it. That's a bit more realistic. Get it down towards the majority. Okay, good stuff. So most of your organisations, some you might not be, some you might be using the Google Suite or Amazon Web Services or what have you. So we're kind of at a tipping point in a lot of the organisations I work with, that initially the cost of storing data in 365 was kind of buried. We've got licensing costs, and it's not really costing anything beyond the licensing costs, so let's not think about it too much. And I think it's I think the standard for sharing storage in SharePoint Online is 1 terabyte per tenancy plus 10 gigabytes per user. If anyone wants to correct me on that, feel free to jump in. I work with a lot of organisations who are now bumping up against that. And suddenly, all that stuff that's sitting in SharePoint Online, well, it's coming for you, Karen, imminently. It's beginning to have a real visible cost. So whereas previously pretty relaxed, it was picked up in the standard cost in the licensing costs. Suddenly, organisations are having a little bit of a oops moment when they realise that that's not infinite, and we can approach it in different ways. I mean, I hate to tell you folks, OneDrive isn't included in that. So some organisations are saying, let's just shove everything into OneDrive with all the horrors that raises for information governance people, because we don't have the visibility of that. Others are just shelling out extra money to Microsoft or whoever they're working with. But a few of them are actually thinking some hard thoughts and actually coming back to information governance people and saying, well, I wish we'd listened to you about data cleansing before we migrated to SharePoint, about applying retention and disposal policies, retention labels, about having as we would say in the west of Scotland, a right good redout. So there is an opportunity. So Karen certainly picked up on it, and hopefully a few others have as well. Talk to your IT department, find out where they are in terms of, how much of our SharePoint space have we now taken up without having to go into further costs. And then we can demonstrate, okay, we apply information governance, we apply retention rules, we apply better structure and architecture. We can stay within our base costs, or at least minimise where we're going beyond that.
And I think as well that because of the amount of data that we're getting, it's although there's a cost element there. I mean, there's almost like there's a financial cost. There's a sort of a efficiency cost in terms of the number of times I see people who just can't say they can't find stuff. And it's not that they can't find stuff because it's not there. They can't find stuff because there's so much there.
Yeah.
And again, this whole thing about literally clearing the wood so you could see the trees. And I think a lot of organisations have moved on a little bit from the don't bang on to me about storage costs because I can go down to Dixon's and buy a 15 gigabyte hard drive, and so we've moved away from talking about that. But it's just the sheer volume of stuff that's created just means it's all just being saved, because people aren't very good at sort of necessary life cycle management. And it just means when you're trying to find something and you type the word, silly example, report in, you just get this avalanche of stuff back. And although the search tools, and we'll talk a bit more about search in a minute, because that we had a question that came in actually before the webinar about search, which we'll come on to in a sec. But although there's the search facilities, it's only as good as if you've got a tidy room, you'll be able to find stuff quicker. I think that's the problem. Absolutely.
Thanks, Jason. As you said, we did have that prior question submitted, and thanks very much to the colleague that did that, which was essentially, okay, can we still make the case for information architecture and structure when we've got people coming and saying to us, well, you don't need that anymore, you've got search. Search functionality will find everything you need. How's that working out for you folks? how reliable and effective for your searches?
I think the answer to that question is, I mean, I don't know whether this is right or wrong. I think the answer is yes, we still need it, because, and I think when I was pondering the question, I was thinking about, transferring things to the National Archive, to meet the Public Records Act. We need to have groups of records together, and how sometimes if you're still going to do a search, if you pinpoint your search, if I look into the urban area of our file plan to search for Regent Street or something, that's better than typing the word Regent Street across the whole of the network, which would just bring up just about everything. So I think they probably go hand in hand, and I wouldn't like to say search is not any good, and you definitely need structure. But I think you can't have one without the other, and I think they're sort of pals really. But I'm growing more and more into using search, though I've used it for many years, because it's more about promoting to staff how they can search. And that's actually another thing on my to-do list, is just to say to staff, you don't have to type in the word report anymore now. You can use, Boolean ands and ors, things that they've gone, well, I didn't know you could do that. I go, well, you can not just do it in the office, you can do it at home when you're searching the internet. This is how you can narrow down searches. So it's providing them with the tools to do it, but still saying, when they say, oh, it's taking 5 minutes to search, it's like, yeah, that's because you've got a lot of stuff. And if you got rid of it, get a quicker result.
Absolutely. And I'm recruiting to our cause, Jason, Bill Gates, who, and this is a famous quote, first rule of technology is automation applied to an efficient operation magnifies the efficiency. Automation applied to an inefficient operation will magnify the inefficiency. Or garbage in, garbage out.
Yeah.
Organizations can get by fine without information architecture, business classification. So they do just get on and do stuff. But you're missing an opportunity there. And David is flagging that issue, getting people to name things well to start with helps. Yeah, that's absolutely the challenge. So that question that originally came in, should we still be focusing on, or can we still make the case for structure, for business classification, for information architecture, when the world is looking at it through the prism of search? My two answers to that are, basically the point that David has made in the chat. How good are people at naming things? If we're relying on our staff to name things consistently and well, and to apply metadata appropriately, your faith in human nature is stronger than mine, if that's the case. I would also say it's a kind of false dichotomy, because people say, well, do you structure or metadata in search? It's actually the same thing. So it's the difference between sticking the metadata in a label on the object and sticking the object in a box that's got the label on it already. Folders are metadata. That's all they are. So even if and I absolutely recognise that, people say we should be moving away from the obsession with, folder structures and all the rest of it. Fine, I'm comfortable with that. But we still need to think what the structure looks like in terms of the metadata. We still need to think about how we're going to apply those rules. We still need to think about what's reasonable to expect of users. If it's not an area that you're already actively involved in, and some of you will be elbow deep in this stuff, and I'll be interested to hear your comments either in the chat or come off mic. But if it's not something you're looking at the moment, I would say that's an area to invest a bit of time and energy in getting to understand. So if you're working in Microsoft 365, for example, understand managed metadata. Understand what we could achieve by having sort of essentially controlled metadata standards that are available across the organisation. Again, back to my point earlier on about turf wars, there may be colleagues looking at data governance and things that think that is their territory, but my guess is, certainly most organisations I work with, that nobody's really got ownership of that. Nobody's really owning metadata and metadata management. So yeah, I think that's absolutely an area to explore and look at the benefits to the business of getting that right.
I mean, one of the things that I think of is that unfortunately, things like information governance tends to become more important when disasters happen, unfortunately, because it is the sort of the looking for stuff. And I often wonder now whether, as we get potentially, more things happen environmentally and potentially more, unfortunately, disasters, whether they're environmental or whatever, and obviously we're coming out of COVID really, and I often wonder whether organisations have suddenly starting to get a bit more interested in IG because they're having to deal with this information a lot quicker and have said, well, I can't find it, and okay, well, that's because, you know, our information governance is a mess. Well, okay, here we are, do something about it. So in other words, when things are going okay and people are doing business as usual, perhaps that's not as perhaps that it's not at the forefront of people's minds when suddenly we need to provide this information now. Where is it?
Yeah.
And don't get me wrong, I wouldn't say that we need to have disasters to champion our causes. I just think it's quite interesting that how if you almost like to plot it on a graph, how interest increases.
Yeah.
Let's say post disaster or during the middle of a disaster, and then it starts to dip again.
Mm.
And there's a little bit of me that wants to I'm actually waiting for someone to say to me, oh, well, anyway, what's the point, Jason, of doing that? Because, you know, that will never happen. And I might go, well, yeah, well, no one thought COVID would happen, but it did. You know, and I say that in the sense of, okay, look, we can't just bank anymore and just, you know, poo-poo our information governance as not being important.
Yeah.
Because we do need it. It's equally, and if not more important than IT and finance and everything, because like you said, it's the wrapper around so many things.
Yeah. And yeah, and Sadie is echoing that point in the chat that COVID has changed a lot of people's perspective. Certainly shifted the digital agenda forward for most organisations. Yeah. And I think that point of risk, which was one of the headings we flagged as part of our part of the argument. Alison made the point earlier on about how we can be challenged on our likelihood scores, and I think that feeds into this wider issue that we all know the horror stories. Every organisation's got a few little experiences there, which are, as you say, Jason, it's, oh God, we can't find these records and we're going to court tomorrow or whatever it is. But lots of little lower level ones as well. So we're pretty good, because the law forces us to be, we're pretty good at capturing information security incidents and personal data breaches. So we've got a good evidence base there that we can analyse. We're, in my experience, not so good at systematically capturing the other untoward incidents that either involve, you know, a record keeping failure or what have you as a contributory factor, or that's the main issue. It's a information gap, it's information inaccuracy that's led to problems. Now, I know this sounds quite negative, and a couple of you have emphasised already the importance of showing the value to the business, but that's part of it. I think is proving the negative, is showing that we get this right. We'll never get to the point where we don't have incidents, but we'll certainly hopefully reduce the likelihood and avoid some of the major horrors of the past. So I know every one of you in this call just now have got those examples, either in your own memory, in the memory of colleagues. We really need to get better at capturing them and documenting them, saying this is part of our business case, because, you know, we know this is that there's a significant degree of likelihood in this risk because it's happened before. We've had that thing happen before. Now, that can either just be anecdote or it can be part of our business case if we're better at capturing it. Okay.
So Frank, let me throw a question at you. Why do you think it's so difficult for organizations to decide who manages information governance in the organization? Because in my experience, I mean, we've got that it's this sort of all-encompassing thing, but it's almost like this sort of hot potato, and everybody does a lot of nodding around the table about how we need to manage it, but nobody really volunteers.
So you mean in terms of the sort of senior management ownership?
Yes, or even business areas,
program?
or it's sort of like bounced around, isn't it? It's everybody says it's a good thing.
Yeah.
But it's
I know what you mean. Is I used to do a lot of training of CIROs, senior information risk owners, and you never really get any of them that had volunteered for the role. You're right. It was usually they were out of the office that day when the chief exec was deciding who would be the CIRO, so they ended up with it. I think it's because people recognise the risks and they know the regulatory side and the compliance issues, but they don't really see the flip side of that, which is partly down to us as a community. Perhaps we've overemphasised the other aspect, and it's perhaps going back to the point that Mark made earlier on. If we're better at emphasising how good information governance doesn't just get us out of jail, but actually can improve the way services are delivered, can improve customer service, can enhance our reputation, can facilitate business change and efficiency. If we get better at evidencing that, then senior management will say, well, hang on a minute, I want that in my business area, but I also wouldn't mind being accountable for that for the wider area, the wider organisation. And there you are, John Daly, kind of underlining exactly what you just said, Jason. You ask your boss, why is information governance in your department? Because no one else wanted you. And on that cheerful note,
there's definitely something, isn't there? Just to sort of finish off my little bit. I'm all for this being. This is like a multi-discipline, multi-business unit thing. We literally everybody has to work together here. So although there might be a bit of ownership from a senior management, this sort of committee projecty structure sounds like a good idea, isn't it? You'd want input from the records manager, the IT people, the FOI. So it's a good sort of group thing to do. So rather than sort of lump it in one area, it's sort of a cross business issue. Yeah. But even then, it's like all these things, it still needs to have a senior driver, and a senior support from the top. So always a challenge, and I don't think that's going to change.
Absolutely, and Joanna's emphasised that as well, where you're recognising that what we might use the broad term information governance, but as you're saying, the information-related teams are actually spread across a few departments, so you're bringing them together to coordinate them, and yeah, that's absolutely the way to go. So I'm conscious of time. I'll hand back to Sharon, although I could rant on a little bit longer, but we better not.
No, it's really good, really good. Thank you very much, guys. I don't know about you, but there was a lot that I was learning there. How about we have any thumbs up there? You guys found it interesting, found it useful for today? Be nice to see some reactions there from you all, just to get a gauge there. Also on the, we've got some clappy hands as well. That's amazing. On the element of feedback, we have sent out to all of you guys that have attended a little survey. So it'd be great to have your feedback on today and let us know your interests. Would be amazing as well. Being conscious of time, if anybody has any further questions for the gents, please email us at info@leadershipthroughdata.co.uk, and we're happy to take any further questions away for you. We can do that, not a problem at all. So just moving on from there, if you did find it interesting and you do want to learn a little bit more, then please do have a little look at our information governance course. I've added a link on the chat there, but there's also some dates here to let you know when they're available. So that's where we'll dig down a bit deeper, won't we, guys, into things of understanding and also more practical exercises on how to enhance it, make it better and make a difference back in the business again. So that would be good. And by all means, we've got some free webinars. Please use the QR code or jump on our website to have a little look there as well. Sorry, Frank, was you going to say something?
I was just going to say, if you go on the LTD website, you can actually see who's presenting each course, so you can avoid me. It's okay.
What you like? Oh, I love your courses, Frank. They're really, really good. But no, thank you again, guys, for everything. Also, if you just want to keep in touch with us, here's some details here. Follow us on Twitter and LinkedIn for updates and news and blogs, everything like that, as well as our website, which is leadershipthroughdata.now.com, as we are international.